They thought she was just a janitor and wouldn't understand. But seconds before signing a multi-billion-dollar deal, she interrupted the ceremony, and that's when the real chaos began. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It's really interesting. The smell of antiseptic and wax polish clung to the air like a second skin. It was a smell Raina Harris had come to know intimately over the last 6 years she had worked the night shift at Meyertech Tower in downtown Seattle. At 44, she had grown used to the quiet of midnight hallways and the low mechanical hum of server rooms. Her world existed in the hours between other people's meetings and their commutes home. By the time the sun crested the skyline and spilled its sterile gold light across the glass windows of the skyscraper, she was already gone. Back to the modest one-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger sister. Back to the silence of being unseen. Raina moved down the gleaming hallway on the 35th floor, her mop sliding in steady, practiced arcs over the marble tile. Her hands, rough with years of labor, gripped the metal handle without hesitation. Her back ached from a day of moving carts, lifting bins, bending to scrub stains no one else would ever see. Her uniform, a plain navy blue jumpsuit with the faded emblem of Capstone Cleaning Services, fit her like a second skin. Functional, invisible. Behind closed glass doors, meetings flickered with movement. She could see shadows through the frosted glass, hear the low timbre of men's voices, the occasional burst of laughter, the clink of glassware. No one noticed her. No one ever did. That was part of the job, and sometimes, Raina reminded herself, it was a blessing. They left their secrets out in the open when they believed no one was watching. And Raina always watched. On the 39th floor, the carpet muffled her steps. She moved quietly, not just because of habit, but because she had learned that silence was armor. She passed the corner office of Vice President Tanner, who had once referred to her as the colored ghost. During a holiday party, he didn't know she could hear from the janitor's closet. On most nights, she simply turned the other cheek, her dignity stitched into silence. But some memories lingered like rust, even after years of scrubbing. She had been working since she was 18, first in tech, then in the dark aftermath of accusation, scandal, silence. Once upon a time, she had walked across the graduation stage at Harvard with honors in computer science, shaking hands with faculty who told her she was destined for greatness. But greatness didn't survive false accusations when you were a black woman in a room full of white men. One moment of fabricated misconduct, a subordinate supervisor who couldn't handle being corrected by a younger, smarter woman, had turned her life inside out. No trial, no appeals, just a pink slip and silence. She had left the industry quietly, shamefully, without a name to defend herself. That had been 15 years ago. Now, she scrubbed toilets for the same corporations she once tried to build software for. At 3:43 a.m., Raina pushed her cart toward the executive suites where the marble floors turned colder and the lights stayed on all night. A few screens still flickered. It was rare to see an unlocked workstation, but tonight, one glowed brightly in the far conference room, its sliding glass door open just an inch. Her eyes scanned the hallway. No footsteps, no voices, just the gentle hiss of the ventilation system. Curious, she pushed the door further open with a gloved hand. The tablet on the long obsidian conference table showed an open document titled Confidential Draft, Strategic Merger Agreement with Dynex AI. Raina blinked. Dynex. She had read about the company months ago, steeped in military research, cloaked in buzzwords about neural networks and cloud computing, suspected of design and behavior prediction algorithms for defense contractors. She took a cautious step inside. Just one look. Just a glimpse. The document scrolled automatically in presentation mode, highlighted key points in red. Assumption of liability, executor role, emergency risk containment. Legal language, dry and bloated with conditional clauses, but something caught her eye. Executor of record, R. Harris, external contractor. Her breath caught. She leaned closer. No way. It couldn't be her, but there it was, in bold, black font. Her name, first initial and last, assigned to a role she had never heard of, referenced as a temporary intermediary consultant with discretionary authority over data streams and intellectual asset arbitration. It sounded like gibberish, but Raina had written similar contracts in her previous life. She knew exactly what this meant. They had named her a fall person. If something went wrong with the deal, if the merger turned out to be legally compromised or ethically questionable, it would fall on the external contractor, who had failed to maintain cybersecurity safeguards. And, according to the metadata on the draft, the person fulfilling that role was her. She stepped back from the screen, her heart pounding. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. They had planted her name into a document that would be signed by executives who didn't know or didn't care that she was real. To them, R. Harris was a placeholder, a meaningless name, a shield. She backed out of the room, her mind racing. A thin layer of sweat prickled along her spine. Her shift wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. She'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, and she had no idea what to do with it. Back on the 37th floor, she emptied trash cans and wiped surfaces, but her thoughts kept returning to that contract. Could she get back into the system? Could she find the document again? Her old instincts returned, decoding, deconstructing, decrypting. The muscles hadn't atrophied. They'd just gone unused. Her hands moved automatically as she cleaned, but her mind was a flurry of logic trees and risk assessments. In the staff lounge, she pulled out her old flip phone, the one she kept hidden in a false compartment in her cart. It didn't have internet, but it had a camera. She would return tomorrow night, same floor, same room, and photograph that contract. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but she knew what she couldn't do. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. The next morning, Raina rode the bus home with her cleaning supplies in a reusable grocery bag. Rain slicked the windows. The passengers stared ahead, silent, just like her. She arrived home to her sister Marlene, curled up on the couch with a heating pad and a blanket. The chemotherapy had stolen most of her strength, and the cost of the medication was suffocating them. Raina made tea, then sat in her bedroom, staring at the wall. They had chosen her because she was invisible, because she worked nights and didn't speak unless spoken to, because her badge said maintenance, and no one in power looked beneath uniforms. But they had underestimated one thing. She still remembered how to read code. That night, as she pulled her jumpsuit over her shoulders and tied her boots, Raina felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt awake. She walked out the door without looking back. The following night arrived like a slow exhale, and with it came the cold, steel weight of resolve. Raina sat alone on the edge of her bed, hands clasped between her knees, eyes trained on the chipped linoleum floor of the apartment she had called home for the last 12 years. The silence around her was familiar, but tonight it pressed tighter against her lungs. Marlene had already gone to bed, her pain medicine finally pulling her under after another day of quiet suffering. Raina had waited until she heard the rhythmic breathing before moving. She didn't want her sister to see the tension in her face or the fear she was carefully pressing down beneath her ribs. The contract haunted her. The way her name had sat on that screen, so confidently inserted into the role of a sacrificial pawn. The audacity of it churned inside her like bile. She had been made into a human shield, and no one had even asked. They assumed she wouldn't notice, that she wouldn't understand, that she wouldn't care. But Raina Harris noticed everything. She left the apartment at midnight, earlier than usual, tucking a flash drive and her old flip phone into the false lining of her cleaning cart. The bus ride downtown was uneventful, and when she reached the towering Meyer Tech building, it greeted her with the same indifferent glow as always. Security nodded without words. The receptionist didn't look up from her phone. Raina swiped her badge and took the freight elevator to the 39th floor, her heart knocking quietly against her chest. The hallway was empty. The lights dimmed for after-hours mode. She rolled her cart forward, pausing in front of the conference room. The door was closed tonight, and the monitor dark. For a moment, she thought maybe it had been a fluke, that she had imagined it, or that someone had already wiped the trail. But Raina had lived too long to believe in coincidence. She checked the glass wall for reflections, then slipped inside, careful not to let the door click behind her. She moved straight to the console at the head of the table and pressed the spacebar. The screen flickered to life. Password required. Raina frowned. The night before, the document had been open. Someone must have accessed it later and secured it. She tapped a few common combinations into the login box. Nothing. She tried again, this time with the generic admin override Meyer Tech had used back when she briefly worked in IT temping after her fall from grace. Still nothing. Her palms began to sweat. She didn't have the luxury of time or tools. She couldn't break into the system without risking detection, and she knew that if someone caught her near this workstation, there would be no plausible excuse. Maintenance staff didn't touch terminals. They didn't even have login credentials. Her eyes swept the room, looking for another option. At the far end of the table, she spotted a printed packet carelessly stuffed into a leather portfolio. Raina opened it. Her breath caught. It was a printed draft of the same merger agreement. The pages were numbered, clipped together, and scrawled with notes in blue ink. Some highlighted, some circled. She flipped to page 17. There it was. The clause. Executor of record, R. Harris, external consultant. The paragraph was dense with legalese, but Raina recognized the language for what it was. Strategic misdirection. The sentence construction appeared ordinary on the surface, standard legal protection language, but buried within were conditional phrases that quietly shifted liability. In the event of a data breach, market failure, or regulatory breach, the named contractor would absorb the consequences. If prosecuted, they would become the legal face of failure. She would become the scapegoat for a billion-dollar deception. She photographed the page with her phone, taking multiple shots from different angles. Then she turned to the following page, noting the footnote citing prior precedents. Another red flag. These weren't first-time offenders. This clause had precedent in other mergers. Her mind was a cyclone of memory and skill. Old textbooks, ethics seminars, past case studies. It all came back in a flood. They were using standard-issue non-disclosure protocols and subcontractor loopholes to engineer impunity. Dynex would walk away untouched while Meyer Tech crumbled, with Raina left buried beneath the rubble. She stuffed the document back into the portfolio and returned to her cart, her hands trembling slightly. She exited the room without being seen, exhaling only once she reached the quieter hallway. Her body was moving, but her thoughts raced ahead of her. Later, during her scheduled break, she sat alone in the staff lounge with a cup of burnt coffee and unfolded one of the printed pages she had tucked into her pocket. It was just as damning in paper as it had been on screen. She ran her fingers over the text as if trying to feel the intention behind the ink. She didn't know who had inserted her name, but she had her suspicions. She thought of a woman named Andrea, a smug junior compliance officer who had once asked Raina to sign an access verification form for document deliveries. At the time, Raina hadn't thought twice. These sorts of papers came occasionally, part of the building's procedural bureaucracy. But now she remembered the odd phrasing on that form, the tiny print at the bottom she hadn't read because she hadn't been allowed to take a copy. She folded the page again, slipping it back into her pocket. She had to tell someone. Someone had to know. After her shift ended, Raina waited for the morning staff to arrive. As the elevators opened and employees in suits and heels began flooding in, she spotted Cassandra, a young black woman from accounting whom Raina had spoken to a few times in passing. Cassandra had always been polite, even warm. Summoning her courage, Raina approached her by the coffee bar. "Hey, Cassandra," she said quietly. "Can I talk to you a moment? It's about something I found in a document." Cassandra blinked, surprised, then offered a polite smile. "Sure, Raina. Is something wrong?" Raina hesitated, pulled the folded contract page from her pocket, and offered it. "I think something in here is targeting me. I don't know who else to trust." Cassandra's smile faltered as she read. Her brows lifted, then furrowed. But instead of concern, amusement danced in her eyes. She handed the page back. "Oh, honey, this is legal stuff. You sure you're not just reading too much into it?" "I used to work in tech contracts," Raina said, her voice tight. "I know how this is worded. They're setting someone up, and that someone is me." Cassandra laughed gently. Not cruel, not malicious, but dismissive. "Girl, if you're worried, talk to HR. I'm sure they'll clear it up." "I did," Raina lied. "They didn't answer. They're ignoring it." Cassandra stepped back. "I gotta run to a meeting. Good luck, okay?" Raina watched her go. The disappointment sank into her bones. Maybe Cassandra didn't believe her. Or maybe she did, but chose not to care. Either way, the message was clear. Raina was on her own. Later that afternoon, while preparing to leave the building, she returned to her locker and found a yellow sticky note pressed to the inside of the door. No name, no handwriting she recognized. It read, "Keep reading and you'll regret it." Her skin crawled. It wasn't just bureaucracy. Someone knew she had seen the file. Someone had noticed. She peeled the note off and stared at it until her hands started to tremble. Her instinct screamed to throw everything away, forget the file, go back to invisibility. But Raina had spent too many years letting others walk over her, and she had been asleep for too long. She left the building with the flash drive still hidden in her cart and a fire building in her chest. Back home, Marlene sat hunched over the kitchen table, organizing pills into small plastic boxes. Raina helped her in silence, handing over blister packs and filling the teapot. "Something's wrong at work," Raina finally said. Marlene didn't look up. "Something's always wrong at that place. They're using my name," Raina said, "in a contract, a big one. They're setting me up to take the fall if it goes wrong." Marlene paused. "How do you know?" "I read it. I photographed it. I know how these things work. I used to write this language." Marlene closed the pillbox and sighed. "Then you need to stay away. Don't mess with it. These people, they don't play fair. If I don't say something, they'll destroy me anyway, Raina replied. I'm already in it. I just didn't know. Marlene met her eyes. Her gaze was exhausted, but filled with something close to pride. Then you better make sure you've got proof, real proof, because the moment you speak, they'll come for you. I'm already preparing. That night, Raina didn't sleep. She stayed up rereading the photos, uploading copies to an encrypted drive, writing notes by hand the way she used to when organizing data trees. The old Raina, the one who lived in boardrooms and debugged software until dawn, she was still there, beneath the uniform, beneath the grime. Her fingers were stained from ink and toner, not bleach, and she had only just begun. The rain had not stopped for 2 days, and the city glistened beneath its weight. A gray fog clung to the Meyertech tower like a veil as Raina stepped off the bus with her hood pulled tightly around her face. Her boots splashed into shallow puddles on the sidewalk, but she didn't notice. Her thoughts were elsewhere, wrapped around the words she had read, the names she had highlighted, and the clause on page 17 that had changed everything. Inside the lobby, everything looked as it always did. Polished tile, glass railings, and the cold echo of too much marble. But something felt different, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Security guards in black suits stood straighter, badges visible. There were more of them than usual. Someone had added velvet ropes in front of the elevators, and a sleek podium had been placed near the entrance, holding a framed announcement that Raina caught in passing. Strategic Merger Signing Ceremony, Dynex AIX Meyertech International Level, 40 Executive Conference Hall. Friday, 9 a.m. Press, welcome. It was happening. The deal was about to be finalized. Raina tightened her grip on the handle of her cleaning cart and continued through the checkpoint. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. She was still invisible. And she would use that. Upstairs, the air had a different taste. A scent of fresh orchids filled the hallway. Someone had placed arrangements along the walls, white and blood-red flowers in tall glass vases that caught the overhead lights like crystal. Raina moved past them towards the supply room and slipped inside, closing the door behind her. She reached beneath the false floor panel in her cart and pulled out the manila folder she had prepared the night before. Inside were printouts of the merger document, the page with her name highlighted in yellow marker, screenshots from the internal system, a copy of the access form they had tricked her into signing, and annotations she had written by hand, cross-referencing language from previous contracts, citing loopholes, flagging the risk of indemnity reassignment. Every page had been reviewed and reviewed again. She had not slept. Her fingers ached from typing. Her neck burned from hours hunched over a flickering screen. But she had done it. She had proof. What she didn't have was a plan. She had thought, naively, that someone would listen if she spoke up. But after Cassandra's dismissal, after the anonymous threat, she knew better. Speaking wouldn't be enough. She had to act. She had to stop the deal. Raina exhaled and looked at the simple blue folder in her hands. She didn't look like a lawyer. She didn't sound like an executive. No one would believe her by default. So she would make it impossible to ignore her. She checked her watch. 8:04 a.m. Less than an hour. At 8:37 a.m., she stood in the freight elevator as it crawled upward. Her cart had been left behind. She wore her cleaning uniform, gloves tucked into the back pocket, ID badge clipped to her collar. She carried the folder in one hand and tried to calm the storm in her chest. She felt like a soldier entering battle, armed with nothing but her memory and conviction. The elevator dinged softly. She stepped out onto the 40th floor. It was as though she had walked into another world. The hallway gleamed like a runway. A long, red carpet stretched from the elevator to the double glass doors of the executive conference hall. Spotlights had been set up. A catering team bustled near the walls, laying out trays of champagne flutes and imported fruit. A group of reporters stood near a velvet rope, murmuring into recorders and flipping through notebooks. On the far end of the room, camera crews were adjusting their rigs, preparing for a live broadcast. And in the center, just inside the towering glass doors, a massive black conference table stretched the length of the room. At its head sat Robert Meyer, the founder and CEO of Meyer Tech, a man of silver hair, gleaming watch, and deliberate confidence. To his right sat Julia Meyer, his wife and lead corporate counsel, dressed in a slate-gray designer suit and pearls. Beside her sat the delegation from Dynex AI, all in suits so clean they seemed laminated. There were at least 20 people inside, most of them white, most of them male, and all of them about to sign a document that would ruin her life. Raina stood outside the glass for a moment, watching. Her feet refused to move. Her throat closed. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, go back to her cart, disappear into the service stairwell. No one would know. No one would care. She could keep her job, keep her sister safe, pretend none of this had happened. But she had already been chosen. They had already placed her name on the line. They had already buried her beneath their paper empire. Her hand trembled as she pushed open the door. The air inside was hushed and cold like a cathedral. The room turned toward her in unison. Conversations halted. Chairs stopped creaking. Someone at the far end said, "What the hell?" Raina walked forward. "What is the meaning of this?" asked a man near the front, standing to block her path. "I need to speak," she said, louder than she thought she could. "You don't belong here," said Julia Meyer, her eyes narrowing. "This is a closed session." Raina didn't stop. She reached the end of the table and placed the folder down in front of Robert Meyer. "You're about to sign a contract that names me, Raina Harris, as the responsible party for all legal liability in this merger," she said. "I didn't authorize it. I didn't even know, until 3 nights ago." Murmurs broke out. The press behind the glass began filming. "Security," someone called. "Get her out." "Wait," Robert Meyer said, not taking his eyes off the folder. "What did you say?" Raina pointed to the page she had marked. "Page 17, subsection 4. You'll see my name listed under Executor of Record. If this deal fails, if Dynex is found to have misrepresented their assets, your lawyers have positioned me to take the fall, and I can prove it." He looked down at the page. Julia Meyer stood. "This is ridiculous. This woman is not part of this meeting. She's not authorized to be here." "She's in the contract," Raina snapped. "Didn't your team even read it?" A man in a navy suit, the junior counsel maybe, took the folder and began scanning the page. His lips parted slowly. His face went pale. "She's right," he said. "Her name is here. It's buried, but it's there. And the indemnity language is vague. It technically transfers risk." "Technically," Robert Meyer said, his voice a low growl. "It's a setup," Raina said. "If anything goes wrong, you lose the company, and they walk away clean." Julia Meyer moved to intercept the folder, but Robert held up a hand. "Sit down," he told her. The room was silent. Only the sound of clicking cameras outside the glass broke the stillness. "Who are you?" Robert asked finally. "Raina Harris," she said. "I've worked your night shift for 6 years. I clean your conference rooms. I empty your trash. And I used to write these kinds of contracts before your industry blacklisted me." One of the reporters pressed against the glass. "Who is she?" he whispered to his cameraman. "What's going on in there?" Raina stepped back. Her legs felt numb. Her hands buzzed. "I didn't come to destroy anything," she said. "I came because I refused to be used. You wanted silence. But silence is what let this happen." Robert Meyer turned to the table. "Find out how this happened," he said. "Now." Julia spoke again, colder. "She's lying. Anyone can forge a document." "She didn't forge it," the junior counsel said. "This version matches our draft from last week, and that access form, her signature is on it." Robert's face darkened. "Bring me that form." An assistant rushed out. Raina stood still, breathing hard. Her knees threatened to give out, but she remained upright. She had done it. She had forced them to look. Security arrived, but Robert waved them off. "We're not done here," he said. Behind her, one of the camera crews began rolling. Raina didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just waited, because now they couldn't unsee her. For several seconds after Raina spoke, time seemed to falter. The hum of air conditioning became painfully loud. The champagne fizzing on silver trays sounded like static, and everyone around the table remained motionless, caught between disbelief and dawning recognition. The conference room, a cavern of glass and stone perched at the peak of the Meyer Tech empire, no longer felt like the center of confidence and progress. It felt like a courtroom, and Raina stood alone in the witness box. Robert Meyer's eyes were fixed on the folder in front of him. The printout of the contract page with her name had slipped halfway out, the highlighted clause a glaring yellow wound across white paper. His fingers didn't move to touch it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back, face unreadable, the silence around him heavy with pressure. Julia Meyer stood beside him, her posture tense, every inch of her bearing screaming for control. She glanced towards the security team that had entered the room, poised like wolves at the threshold, waiting for a signal. But the CEO hadn't given one. He hadn't dismissed Raina. He hadn't dismissed anything. The younger lawyer who had confirmed her claims fumbled through the rest of the folder. His face was pale, sweat beading at his hairline. The senior members of the Dynex delegation began to shift in their seats. One of them whispered something to another, too quiet to hear but full of unease. Then, finally, Robert reached forward. He pulled the document fully out and read the line himself. "Executor of Record R. Harris," he muttered. "External consultant." Julia's voice cut in sharply, the edge of it shattering the silence. "This is absurd. It's a typo, a draft. This isn't the final copy." Raina took a step forward. "Then show me the final." Julia's jaw twitched. "You have no stand-in here." "But I'm in the contract," Raina answered, her voice steady. "You made me part of this." "You don't even understand what this is about," Julia said, hands flexing slightly. "It's complicated legal language. You're a janitor." "I'm also a former systems analyst with a degree from Harvard," Raina said, louder now. "And I know exactly what this language means. I helped write clauses just like it years ago. But I never wrote one that turned a human being into a scapegoat." A murmur spread through the room. Reporters outside the glass pressed closer. Someone began streaming the scene live from their phone. Julia turned toward her husband, her voice lowered but urgent. "Robert, you cannot seriously entertain this. It's a distraction." "She's right," said the junior counsel again. "The phrasing in subsection 4 does shift liability. It doesn't use the word indemnify, but the structure implies full absorption of legal fallout by the listed executor. And the access document is questionable." Robert finally spoke, his voice low, hard. "How did she end up in this contract?" The lawyer flinched. "I don't know. We'll need to check the revision history." Julia interjected again. "She probably found a draft and inserted herself. This is what happens when you allow non-cleared staff near sensitive areas." "I have the metadata from the file," Reyna said quickly. "It was already there before I ever saw it. I made copies. The internal system logs show the last editor was someone from legal. You can check that." Robert looked at her now. Truly looked. His eyes were gray, tired, but there was a sharpness behind them, like the edge of a blade buried in velvet. "You have the logs?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I brought everything." Julia scoffed, but her posture had changed. Her confidence was no longer complete. Reyna saw it, the hesitation, the calculation. "Let her show us," Robert said. For the next few minutes, Reyna unpacked her folder in front of the entire board. She showed the printouts of the screen logs, the screenshots of the original draft document, the time-stamped metadata, the access form she had signed under false pretenses, and the notes she had taken comparing similar language used in 2 other contracts she had found in the copier's discard bin. Her voice remained calm, but inside her heart pounded like a drum. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her, every breath a threat of collapse. Julia interrupted repeatedly, tried to dispute the interpretation of the clause, but her efforts grew thinner as the documentation piled up. The younger lawyer backed Reyna on each technical point. Another manager, Laura Davis, quietly confirmed that the document was stored on the server until 2 days ago, when it had been deleted. An unusual move, given standard retention protocols. The longer Reyna spoke, the more the mood in the room shifted. What had begun as scorn and skepticism curdled into tension, doubt, and for some, quiet panic. The executives from Dynex began texting furiously, whispering between themselves. One of them, a man with slicked-back hair and a Texas accent, leaned forward and smiled at Reyna with thinly veiled contempt. "Ma'am," he said smoothly, "we've all seen whistleblowers before. I'm sure you believe what you're saying. But you don't understand the legal and commercial complexity of this arrangement. There's a reason we use terms like intermediary liability buffering. These things are designed to protect the integrity of both entities. It's not personal." "It's my name," Reyna said. "It doesn't get more personal." "Even so," he said with a chuckle, "we're in a professional setting here. I think emotions are getting ahead of facts." Reyna stared at him. "Facts don't need emotion to be true." Robert cleared his throat. "That's enough." He looked at his wife. "You were the last person to sign off on this contract before it went to print. Did you see this clause?" Julia folded her arms. "I reviewed it, yes, but there were dozens of red lines. It's possible this slipped through." "That's your job," he said, her jaw clenched. "You vouched for this," he continued. "You brought in Dynex. You approved the indemnity structure. I also kept this company from being sued 5 times last year," she snapped. "Don't turn this into, 'We're not talking about last year,'" he said. "We're talking about a contract that could have bankrupted us and destroyed our public standing, and made a janitor into a fall guy to do it." Julia looked like she might say something else, but stopped. Silence fell again. Outside, a photographer snapped pictures through the glass. Raina remained standing. She didn't know what would happen next, whether they'd fire her, sue her, call security. But in this moment, she had done what she came to do. She had made them see her. "Thank you," Robert said finally. "You can go." Raina's shoulders dropped slightly. Her hands trembled as she gathered her folder. But as she turned toward the door, Julia spoke again, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't over," she said. "You have no idea what you've done." Raina didn't look back. She walked out into the hallway, the murmurs of the press rising as she passed, her footsteps echoing in the marble corridor. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her vision blurred with 1,000 possible consequences. But for the first time in years, she felt awake in her skin. She had stepped into their world, spoken their language, and told the truth. She didn't know if it would be enough, but it was a start. By the time she reached the service elevator, her legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the metal wall, the cold seeping through her jumpsuit. She closed her eyes. She saw page 17 burned into her mind like scripture. Back at home that evening, Marlene sat on the couch in her usual spot, watching a rerun of an old courtroom drama. Raina entered quietly and dropped her bag by the door. She stood for a long moment, watching her sister's profile. "You're late," Marlene said without looking. "I did something," Raina said. Marlene turned her head. "I told the truth, and I made them listen." Marlene's face changed, not with fear, with something like pride. But it didn't last. The next morning, Raina received a message from Human Resources. Her badge was deactivated, her access revoked, her employment status listed as under review. She had forced the truth into the light. Now she would face the consequences. The email came just after 7 in the morning. Raina had barely changed out of her uniform when her phone buzzed once. No ringtone, no urgency. Just a sterile notification with a subject line that made her blood turn to ice. MeyerTech HR notification. Administrative leave pending review. The body of the message was as dry and procedural as she'd expected. Her keycard access had been suspended. Her locker had been sealed. She was instructed not to return to the premises until contacted for an official hearing. No mention of her presentation, no acknowledgement of the contract, no reference to the exposure she had just caused. It was written as if she were an inconvenience, a glitch in the workflow, not the woman who had stopped a billion-dollar fraud from being signed in front of cameras and executives. Raina stared at the message in the silence of her apartment. Marlene had just left for a doctor's appointment, and the TV was off, the tea kettle cold. The walls of the apartment, once a refuge from humiliation and fatigue, now pressed in around her like padded restraints. She scrolled through the message again, then placed the phone face down on the table and sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the sky was bruised with cloud cover. A few children dragged their backpacks along the sidewalk on their way to school, oblivious to the reality crashing through Raina's world. She wasn't surprised. Not really. She had known, down in the marrow of her bones, that pushing against a structure like MeyerTech would come with consequences, but the speed of it startled her. Less than 24 hours ago, she had stood in a conference room in front of the company's most powerful figures. Now, she was locked out like a thief. By mid-morning, the smear campaign began. It started small. A vaguely worded blog post on a tech news site described a disruptive outburst by a night maintenance employee during a confidential merger session, framing the event as a breakdown of internal security protocols. No names were mentioned, but the implication was clear. Raina recognized the phrasing, sanitized legalese designed to suppress facts while triggering suspicion. 2 hours later, another article appeared, this one more aggressive. From mop to megaphone, the woman who hijacked a corporate deal. The tone was mocking, dismissive. It described her actions as dramatic, unsubstantiated, and possibly criminal. A disgruntled employee with a checkered employment record and no formal legal training. It called her claims deeply questionable and suggested she had possibly fabricated or manipulated documents to gain attention. She read the entire piece without blinking, not even when it quoted an anonymous Myrtech spokesperson who claimed, "It is unfortunate that someone without a clear understanding of corporate legal structures has chosen to insert themselves into an executive process." It wasn't just character assassination, it was a message. Stay down. Stay quiet. And the most galling part, the image that accompanied the piece was one of her, taken from security footage. A still frame, mid-motion, captured as she placed her folder on the table. Her expression serious, assertive, but the caption beneath read, "Unidentified employee interrupts contract signing." Unidentified. They still wouldn't say her name. Even now they were trying to erase her. But someone else did. By evening, a different kind of story began circulating on social media. A short video, posted by a young tech reporter named Vihan Patel, went viral on Twitter and LinkedIn. It was taken from a smartphone camera outside the glass wall of the conference room. It showed Raina standing at the head of the table, raising her voice, not in anger, but with clarity, as she explained the legal implications of the hidden clause. The post read, "A night janitor just stopped a corporate merger by pointing out a buried liability clause no one else noticed. Her name is Raina Harris, and she's not invisible anymore." Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times. Activists, labor organizers, and legal professionals began commenting. Some applauded her courage. Others dissected the contract language from the screenshots she had provided. A few attorneys even confirmed that the clause in question could, under certain interpretations, shift legal responsibility to an uninformed third party. Raina watched the storm unfold from the silence of her living room. She didn't post anything herself. She didn't reply to messages, but she read them. She saw the growing wave of people who believed her. People who said they'd seen the same kinds of abuses. Contracts worded to protect the powerful and punish the expendable. And then came the message. It arrived late, nearly midnight. A blank email with no subject line. The body contained only one sentence. "Stop digging or you'll be buried." No name, no signature, no traceable metadata. Her breath caught. Her skin crawled. She stared at the words until they blurred, then read them again. She closed the laptop slowly and sat very still, the shadows in her apartment suddenly too deep, the silence too loud. She had made them uncomfortable. Now they were warning her. They had already taken her job. Now they wanted her silence. She reached for her phone with shaking fingers and dialed her sister. Marlene answered on the third ring. "You okay?" "No," Raina said, "but I need you to know something. If anything happens, if I don't come home—" "Don't say that. Listen to me," she said firmly. "There are files on my computer. A folder marked Kettle. If anything happens, send them to the reporter named Vihan Patel. He'll know what to do." Marlene's voice cracked. "You're scaring me." "I'm scared too," Raina whispered, "but I can't stop now." The next morning, she was trending. News outlets that had smeared her now scrambled to update their headlines. Raina Harris was no longer an anonymous disruptor. She was a whistleblower, and more importantly, she was right. Multiple independent legal analysts confirmed the implications of the clause she had flagged. Corporate watchdog groups began demanding an internal investigation at MyerTech. Labor unions issued statements praising her vigilance. Even a few politicians chimed in, calling for regulatory oversight of contractual language abuse in tech mergers. Raina didn't feel triumphant. She felt exposed. She had become a symbol, and symbols are targets. Her apartment buzzer rang unexpectedly around noon. She froze. No one ever visited without calling first. Marlene was at the hospital. Raina approached the intercom slowly. A deep male voice crackled through the speaker. "Package for R. Harris. Signature required." "I didn't order anything," she said without pressing the talk button. Silence. Then, after a moment, the buzzer rang again. Louder this time, more insistent. She backed away. Her phone was already in her hand. She dialed 911, but before the operator could answer, the buzzer stopped. When she peeked through the curtains, the man was gone. No truck, no uniform, just tire tracks in the rain. That night, she barely slept. She moved a chair beneath the doorknob and kept the lights on. Around 3 a.m., she opened her laptop again and stared at the files. Something told her this went deeper than just one clause in one contract. MyerTech hadn't just tried to offload liability. They had created a legal maze to hide accountability, and Dynex had helped them build it. She began digging through old directories, cached PDF backups from shared printers, scrubbed metadata from Word documents she had encountered during years of cleaning unlocked workstations. And slowly, a pattern emerged. There were other contracts, other third-party names, other fake consultants, always buried in the same place, always paired with ambiguous liability phrases. They'd done this before. She began compiling a list. Dates, contract titles, document IDs. She worked until dawn, her fingers numb, her eyes stinging. The truth she had uncovered wasn't isolated. It was systemic. And then, as the sun rose, her inbox pinged. A single message from an encrypted email. The sender identified only as John Smith. The subject line, "You were right, and you saw only the surface." Inside was a single paragraph. "I worked at MyerTech. I tried to warn them 2 years ago. They buried me too. But I have everything. If you want to finish what you started, reply to this message. But be careful. These people don't just destroy careers. They erase people." Attached was a single file, a bank ledger, offshore payments, shell company names, and one name Raina recognized instantly. Julia Meyer. She closed the laptop and leaned back. Everything had just changed again. And this time it wouldn't be contained inside any conference room. Raina sat motionless in the dim blue light of her laptop screen, the name Julia Meyer burning on her retinas like an afterimage from a too bright flame. The offshore ledger was a single page, dense with transaction codes, account numbers, and dates, but the implication was immediate and unmistakable. Transfers routed through shell entities with vague names, amounts that dwarfed any standard legal retainer or consulting fee. And in the beneficiary field of more than one transaction, there it was. Silver Cross Holdings. A company she had never seen on any MyerTech paperwork, but one that the anonymous email had flagged. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as her breath slowed, a creeping numbness settling into her chest. It wasn't only that Julia Meyer's name was attached to a covert offshore account. It was the undeniable realization that what Raina had stumbled upon was not an isolated contract trick. It was a pattern, a method, a strategy designed to extract profit while redirecting risk with scapegoats lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. She replied with one sentence, "I want to know everything." The response came just minutes later. "Meet me. 6 p.m. tomorrow, Moonbeam Cafe, back patio, no devices. D.W." She reread it twice, then whispered the letters aloud. D.W. David Wilson. The name was unfamiliar, but the initials matched the metadata she'd found buried in an old audit memo the week before. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, only that the memo had been one of the few internal warnings about liability structures in Meyer Tech's earlier partnerships. Warnings that had mysteriously disappeared from the archive days later. She closed her laptop and sat very still. Outside, a car passed beneath the window and cast a gliding shadow across the wall. The night air was heavy with moisture, and distant sirens echoed through the neighborhood like ghostly wails. Raina didn't sleep. Instead, she sat on her bed, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the door. The next day passed slowly, every hour stretching into a question. She checked the alley behind her building 3 times. She unplugged her Wi-Fi and left her phone turned off. When Marlene returned from her doctor's appointment, Raina kept her answers short, her voice calm but distracted. Marlene noticed. "You're doing something again," she said as she sat in her chair by the kitchen window, arms folded. "I can feel it." Raina nodded. "I'm meeting someone." "Someone you trust?" "I don't know," she said, "but he knows what I've seen, and he sent me proof." Marlene looked away, then back. "Are you being followed?" "I don't know that either." They were quiet for a long time, then Marlene said, "If you disappear, what should I do?" Raina's voice cracked only slightly. "Send everything to Vihan. Tell him not to wait." The coffee shop sat in a quiet neighborhood just beyond downtown, nestled between a florist and an old record store with warped vinyl covers displayed in the front window. It was the kind of place people didn't look twice at. Raina arrived 10 minutes early and sat on a wooden bench in the back patio as instructed, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie. She had left her phone at home. No bag, no notes, just memory. At exactly 6 o'clock, a man appeared from the side entrance, tall and thin, with a weathered face and silver streaks at his temples. He wore a long brown coat and moved with the quiet caution of someone used to watching his surroundings. "Miss Harris?" he asked. She nodded. He sat across from her and looked around once, then leaned forward. "My name is David Wilson," he said. "I worked at Meyer Tech in internal compliance until 2 years ago." "What happened?" "I raised concerns about our merger with Neuron X in 2021. Same patterns, same contracts. I found language assigning financial and legal risk to an unknowing subcontractor listed by initials only. EL. I confronted legal. 3 days later, I was placed on leave for erratic behavior. A week after that, someone tried to break into my apartment." Raina's stomach turned. "They said I was stealing data," he continued. "Filed a restraining order. I lost everything. Friends, job, credit score, and I couldn't prove a thing. Until now." He pulled a small envelope from his coat and slid it across the table. Raina hesitated, then opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, spreadsheets, and notes scribbled in a tight, frantic hand. Several names jumped out. Fake consulting firms, off-book payments, identical clauses appearing in different mergers. At the center of them all, Julia Meyer's signature. "She's not just the legal counsel," David said. "She's the architect. She's been designing these contracts for over a decade, and Dynex isn't the first company to benefit from it. Why hasn't anyone exposed it? Because it's legal. On paper, it looks like smart risk management. But when you stack them all together, when you see how the same mechanisms keep showing up, it stops looking like negligence. It starts looking like intent. Raina absorbed every word. She felt the chill again, deeper now, but also something else, a terrible clarity. "Why did you contact me?" she asked. "Because you did what I couldn't," he said simply. "You spoke up while it was still happening, and you made them flinch." Back at home that night, Raina stayed up organizing the evidence David had given her. She created backups, labeled folders, cross-referenced timelines. Each connection made the picture clearer. Silver Cross Holdings had ties to at least 4 previous shell companies. In every merger, someone like her, low status, obscure, had been designated as the fall person. Some were interns. Some were contract temps. One, she learned, had died in a car crash 2 weeks after being named in a collapsed deal. It was more than fraud. It was a system of corporate extraction hidden behind a paper curtain. Raina worked until her eyes refused to stay open, then collapsed into bed. She dreamed of names written in invisible ink, of contracts written in blood, of janitors cleaning the floors of burning buildings. The next morning, she woke to find a black SUV idling across the street from her apartment. It wasn't subtle. She drew the curtain slowly, heart hammering, and watched. No one exited. No one entered. It sat there until dusk, then drove away. That night, she received another email. "This is your last warning. Walk away." It came from a burner address, no IP, no reply field. Raina closed the laptop and pressed her hands to her face. Marlena watched from the hallway. "They're watching you," she said. Raina didn't respond. "You need to stop." "I can't." "They'll kill you." "I know." A long pause. "Then promise me," Marlene said. "Promise you'll come home." Raina looked at her sister, her eyes dark and raw. "I promise I'll try." The next day, Robert Meyer summoned Julia to his office. He waited until the door closed before speaking. "I want the truth," he said, voice flat. "Did you know about the clause?" Julia's expression remained neutral. "Of course not." "Don't lie to me." She tilted her head. "Do you really think I'd risk everything for a buried line of liability?" "I think you've done it before." Her smile vanished. "I've been reviewing old audits," he said, "contracts, shell firms. Your name shows up in too many places." "You have no proof." "I will." Julia's voice dropped into a hiss. "Be careful, Robert. You don't know what doors you're opening." "I think I do," he said, "and I'm calling in someone to open the rest." Later that night, Raina received a message from Robert Meyer himself. It was brief. "We need to talk. I believe you." Attached was a name: Victoria Lynn, J.D., Corporate Integrity Counsel, and a question. "Will you work with her?" Raina stared at the screen for a long time, then typed her reply. "Yes, but I want everything." Because she wasn't fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for the people whose names never made the headlines, and for the ones who couldn't speak before they vanished. The Meyer Foundation Gala was an annual ritual of polished glass, designer gowns, and curated reputations. Held in the vaulted atrium of the company's flagship headquarters, it was a carefully choreographed display of wealth and power, where senators and software developers sipped wine under the same chandeliers, and where Robert Meyer traditionally stood at the podium to speak about innovation, legacy, and the future of ethical technology. But this year, something was different. The air hummed with something heavier than anticipation. The flowers lining the stairs were paler than usual, the music quieter, and the guests spoke in hushed tones that did not match their sequined exteriors. In the center of the hall, beneath the MeyerTech logo displayed in 10-foot gold lettering, Robert Meyer stood in a simple black suit with no tie. His face, always the polished mask of a man used to applause, wore a different expression tonight, something taut, solemn, and resolute. Beside the doors, Raina Harris waited. She had arrived without ceremony, escorted by one of Robert's aides through a side entrance, dressed not in uniform or even in borrowed glamour, but in a plain black blouse and dark slacks. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her earrings small, her shoes flat. She looked like a woman who had come to testify. Victoria Lynn stood beside her, crisp and composed in a charcoal-gray dress and a narrow leather binder clutched in one hand. Raina still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Just days ago she'd been watching press crews slander her name. Now she was walking into the belly of the same empire she had stood against. "I know it's difficult," Victoria had told her earlier that morning, "but your voice is the fulcrum of this case. If you choose to speak, you will shift the weight." Raina hadn't answered, but now as she watched Robert ascend the stage with a slowness that was almost reverent, she understood what Victoria meant. The truth was heavy, but silence was heavier. The room hushed as Robert reached the podium. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and waited. A few flashes from the back lit up his face, but no music played, no host introduced him. This wasn't the usual MeyerTech performance. There were no videos, no slides, no jokes about AI and dinner parties. "I'm not speaking tonight as a CEO," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm speaking as a man who made mistakes, and who almost made one too big to survive." The guest shifted, uncertain. "You all know that MeyerTech was on the brink of a historic merger with Dynex AI. You may have read articles, heard rumors, and perhaps even formed opinions. But I want you to hear from me what really happened." He paused. "We almost signed a deal that would have placed this company, and every person who depends on it, at catastrophic risk, because of a single clause, a few sentences, written in deliberate obscurity, and almost no one saw it." A ripple of tension ran through the crowd. Not our board, not our legal team, not even me. He looked up, eyes scanning the room until they stopped on Raina, still standing by the wall. Except one person. Every head turned. She saw what none of us did. She spoke when none of us would have. She didn't have a title, or a law degree, or an office. She had a mop and a folder. A few gasps broke the silence. And if she hadn't walked into that room, calmly, confidently, with proof in her hand, we would have fallen into a trap that was set for us. A trap designed to extract billions while sacrificing the people at the bottom. He stepped away from the podium. For a moment, Raina thought he was finished. Then he turned back, his voice firmer. "That woman is here tonight, and she deserves more than a round of applause. She deserves justice, and protection, and a place at the table." He gestured toward her. "Miss Raina Harris?" The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to turn toward her. Not with confusion or pity, but with the growing awareness that something irreversible had just taken place. Victoria nudged her gently. Raina took a step forward, and then another. And then she was walking across marble under lights that felt like heat lamps, past rows of chairs filled with people who had never looked at her before, but who now couldn't look away. Her hands didn't shake. Her spine stayed straight. When she reached the edge of the stage, Robert stepped back and offered the podium. She took it. Her voice didn't rise or waver. It simply existed, firm and real, for the first time on a platform that had been denied to her all her life. "My name is Raina Harris," she said. "I've worked the night shift at Meyer Tech for 6 years. Most of you have never seen me. That's all right. I'm used to being invisible." Someone in the audience shifted uncomfortably. "But I saw something," she continued, "something that was meant to be hidden, and I decided I wouldn't stay quiet about it." She paused, breathing. "I didn't do it for glory, or revenge, or out of spite. I did it because I saw my name in a place it didn't belong, next to consequences I didn't deserve. I did it because the truth matters, even when it comes from someone you overlook." She stepped away from the microphone. The room erupted. But Raina didn't register the applause. She heard it like static. Her eyes found Marlene in the third row. Robert had made sure she had a seat. Her sister's face was wet with tears. Raina had never seen her cry in public before. Later that night, Victoria met her backstage with a flash drive in hand. "This is everything," she said, "the complete case file, testimonies, contracts, transactions. We filed the suit this morning. Federal fraud, conspiracy, corporate misconduct." "And Julia?" Raina asked. "She's already been subpoenaed." Robert joined them then, shoulders lower now. "Human." "She thought she was smarter than everyone," he said. "She was, for a while." "She still might be," Raina said. "Not smarter than you," he said. Within 48 hours, the story broke wide. Julia Meyer was named as the central architect of a complex liability shifting scheme that had operated through at least 5 mergers over a decade. Dynex AI's CEO resigned. The company's stock dropped overnight. Investigations began. A criminal inquiry followed. And Raina Harris became the key witness. The trial lasted 4 months. 4 long, public, brutal months. Raina testified 3 times, each with more clarity than the last. Her notes, her photos, her annotated copies of contracts became key exhibits. David Wilson testified too, his voice shaken but steady. The name Silver Cross Holdings became infamous. So did the phrase, "page 17." In the end, Julia Meyer and 2 others were convicted on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. They received 10-year sentences. Meyer Tech, under new leadership, began a full audit of its practices and opened a foundation for corporate ethics education. The first scholarship they offered went to Raina Harris. She didn't accept it. Instead, she asked for something else. She asked for funding to create a public resource center for contract education, a place where workers, interns, contractors, and non-lawyers could learn how to read what they were asked to sign. Robert approved it on the spot. At the opening ceremony, Raina didn't give a speech. She sat in the back row while others spoke of her courage, her impact. She listened quietly, a notebook in her lap, her hands finally at rest. Afterward, a girl about 18 approached her, nervous, eager. "Are you really the janitor from the video?" she asked. Raina smiled. "I was." "Did it feel scary? To stand in that room?" "It still does," Raina said. "Every day." The girl nodded. "I want to do something like that one day." "Then start by reading everything they give you," Raina said. "Twice." The girl laughed. They stood together, watching the plaque being unveiled. The Raina Harris Center for Contract Literacy. Because no one is too small to matter. That night, Raina walked home with Marlene under a clear sky. For the first time in weeks, there was no one watching from the street. No cameras, no black SUVs, just the soft sounds of the city returning to itself. "You didn't just clean their floors," Marlene said. "You cleaned the whole damn building." Raina smiled, tired but whole. "I was just doing my job," she said, but this time everyone heard her. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out more videos on the channel, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to see it.